Okay, I thought it'd be worthwhile to do a video on the general servicing. Not all the items, but some key items that were performed on the bike. Now, even though this was a clip-on master link, the plate was real tough to get off. It was half rusted on, and it must have been pressed on in the first place. So I just grabbed my channel lock pliers and pried the thing off. And you can see how rusty the sprockets are underneath there. Now the front sprocket has a locking or bending washer that rides up on the side of the nut to prevent it from backing off. So I'm using a rubber mallet it looks rougher than it is, but I'm actually just gently pounding down that washer. And it's pretty obvious this was the original sprocket. That's a stock Kawasaki sprocket. Using kerosene, I take a stab at cleaning up the area around the sprocket in the front case. Clean everything up, now's a great opportunity to do it. Five minutes of work pays off. If there's any cracks or dings, this is a great way to see them. You'll never see that stuff underneath the grease and oil. The nuts on the rear sprocket were a little fussy to get off. We had to come aboard them, but once they broke free, it was fine. I'm fussy about the brand of sprockets and chain I use. I've had great luck with RK chains and JT sprockets. I'm sure everybody has their own brand loyalty, but those ones work for me. As usual, if there's a torque spec, I use it. It was common in the late 80s and early 90s that these rare race bikes, these rare limited edition bikes, had gold chains. Suzuki was notorious for doing it with their GSX-RR models to denote the sort of the exclusivity of the bike. So in that vein, I put a gold chain on this bike. It's a little more expensive. In fact, the chain itself was $185, even with my deal at the dealership. Now normally I would have the rear end of the bike up in the air and I would spin the back tire on, but I was working on the front end of the bike at the time and it was raised. The back end was down on the table. So I just put the transmission in neutral and rolled it forward with the case cover off. It was pretty easy. I have a Motion Pro riveting tool to rivet the master link on. It goes on in just a few minutes. Okay, got a new chain installed here. So what I'm going to do now is show you how I clean it and how I adjust it and how I align the rear wheel. The whole thing doesn't take very long, but I'll show you how I do it. To start, I'm going to clean this chain. It's a beautiful gold chain from RK. I think this bike was shipped brand new with a gold chain, so this kind of sticks with it. And so anyway, I'll clean off the packing grease as per the manufacturer's recommendation. Then I'll lube it with a proper chain lube, or chain wax as I use, lube and wax. And then I'll show you how I align it. So first things first, I put the bike up on a stand here. As you can see, this is a pit bull stand, which I swear by, and I've had this one for many years. It works great. It's a one-man stand. It comes on the side here. So I get my kerosene. Now there are probably better things to clean a chain with than kerosene. I've used kerosene for years. Um, and it's easy on the O-rings and it's easy on the chain, but it's not great for your health or the environment. However, for now this will continue to do for me. Okay, for alignment, I tape a piece of orange string to the back of the tire, and then I pull it alongside of each sidewall on either side to project forward where the rear tire is pointing. Now, before you do this, loosen up the chain, put both adjusters forward as far as possible on the swing arm so you got lots of room to back them off and do the alignment. And now that it's just touching the sidewalls on the rear, you project both the left string and the right string forward around the front tire. You can tell if it's a little loose on one side or a little tight on the other. There we go. Bike had sat for 10 years and this tire was pretty dry and was a little fussy to get off. As you can see, this video is out of sync with the chain and sprocket. Obviously, I changed the tire before I put on the chain and sprockets, but the wheel came off and on, like most sport bikes, pretty easily. Here's an old trick. I use a pry bar in place where the axle would go in order to hold the wheel in place while I push the axle through. Saves time. Now as I pop the axle through with the palm of my hand, it slowly pushes out the pry bar and takes its place. Fuel system on this bike's very, very expensive, so I replaced the fuel filter. And I ended up, as I was running through the fuel lines, realizing how bad the fuel lines were checked on the inside. I mean, they were cracked and decrepit, and eventually those crumbs would work their way down into the filter, so I decided to replace all of the fuel lines on the bike, along with the filter. And this is an easy job. This stuff is easy to get your hands on. And Kawasaki still produces all the parts, so it's a no-brainer. I do reuse the clamps though. Here's the plumber's lube I told you about in one of the earlier videos. This here stuff is just a godsend for putting on fittings. You don't have to do it all the time, but just that initial setup. It's so much easier on your cables. They slide right on. And it doesn't damage the rubber so much, and especially some of these older ones where there's there's probably some cracking on the rubber. If you can't replace it, at the very least, lube up your fittings with this here stuff, and they'll go right on. Much easier. I've had good luck for years with EBC brakes. I know their product, and I've used it on many bikes I've done, so no problems there. Front brakes are very easy to do. This is literally a 5-minute job. You undo the brake calipers and pull out the pin, and I do lube the pin though before I put them back in. There's the one pin and a cotter pin. That pulls right out on the top of the caliper. And then you put the new pads in, and then slide the pin to hold them in place, and that's it. Bolt them back on, you're good to go. Oil and grease are the worst things to contaminate brake pads, so I always repeatedly clean up the brake system with brake cleaner.
Somebody had drilled out the lock cylinder for some reason or other in the tank. I'm assuming because it was seized and they needed to get at the tank. So it needed to be replaced. I bought this one from Kawasaki right from the factory, so it's pre-keyed. Putting it in as a snap, it's basically pushing it down into its cylinder and then gently turning just the tip of it with the screwdriver while you push down, and it locks the locking tumbler down into its slot. Very easy.